In 1870, one man built a fully working subway beneath New York City in secret. 400,000 people rode it, and then it was buried, forgotten, and erased from history. Here's why. I wasn't searching for hidden history when I started looking into 19th century transit. I just wanted to answer one question. Why did New York City wait until 1904 to build a subway? By the 1860s, the city was suffocating under its own traffic. London had already opened an underground railway in 1863. New York had the wealth, the engineers, and a screaming need for a solution. So why did it take 4 more decades? That's when I found the photographs. Not sketches, not proposals, actual photographs from 1870 showing a fully operational underground railway beneath Broadway. A waiting room with chandeliers, frescoed walls, a goldfish fountain, a grand piano, and a sleek cylindrical train car drifting silently through a brick tunnel powered by nothing but air. No smoke, no horses, no noise. Just passengers gliding beneath the streets of Manhattan. 400,000 people rode it in its first year alone. It worked, and then it vanished. Not slowly replaced, not quietly retired, it simply stopped. The tunnel was sealed behind brick. The train car sat untouched underground for 42 years until construction workers accidentally punched through a wall and found it, still sitting on the tracks as if waiting for riders who never returned. The official story says a stock market crash made expansion impossible. But the sequence of events, the timing, the people involved, none of it holds together once you start pulling the thread. The man behind it was Alfred Ely Beach. If you've never heard his name, that gap in your knowledge is itself part of the story. Beach was the owner and editor of Scientific American, one of the most respected publications in America. He was a patent attorney who had evaluated thousands of inventions. He held patents of his own, including a writing device for the blind that earned a gold medal at the 1853 Crystal Palace Exposition. This wasn't a fringe inventor. This was one of the most credentialed, well-connected innovators in the country. And he had been thinking about underground transit since 1849, when he first raised the idea in his own magazine. By the late 1860s, New York was desperate for exactly what Beach was designing. 700,000 people were compressed in lower Manhattan. The streets were a slow catastrophe. Horse-drawn carriages moved at a walking pace through traffic so thick that crossing Broadway could take half an hour. Dead horses were left lying in the road. The air carried manure, dust, and disease. One newspaper reported that a healthy person couldn't ride a dozen blocks without leaving with a headache. Beach watched it all from his office window overlooking City Hall. He wrote, "A tube, a car, a revolving fan. Little more is required." In 1867, he constructed a working demonstration at the American Institute Fair, a 100-foot wooden tube with a car carrying 10 passengers propelled forward by a giant fan and pulled back by suction. Crowds were stunned. This was the future. Clean, silent, fast. But Beach already understood the obstacle standing between his invention and the city that needed it. New York in 1868 was controlled by William Tweed. Boss Tweed ran the city like a personal treasury. His political machine was siphoning somewhere between $40 and $200 million from city contracts through fraud, kickbacks, and fabricated invoices. Tweed held financial ties to the elevated railway companies being planned for Manhattan. He had connections to the horse car lines dominating surface transit. A working underground subway threatened every stream of income Tweed controlled. So Beach did something remarkable. He lied. He applied for a city permit to construct small pneumatic mail tubes under Broadway, tubes for moving letters and packages. The city approved it. Then he built something else entirely. He leased the basement of a clothing store at Broadway and Warren Street, directly across from City Hall, where Tweed's people worked every single day. And for 58 nights, his workers dug by lantern light, hauling dirt away before dawn, constructing a full passenger tunnel beneath the feet of the men who would have shut it down on sight. Beach invented a hydraulic tunneling shield for the project, the first circular tunnel shield ever used in America. By the time they were finished, there were 312 feet of brick-lined tunnel, 9 feet in diameter. He spent $350,000 of his own money, the equivalent of roughly $8 million today. Think about what that tells you. A man of his standing, his resources, his reputation, forced to build in secret, at night, hiding evidence before sunrise, because he knew the political system would never give him permission to do it openly. That's not bureaucratic inefficiency. That's what suppression looks like. On February 26, 1870, Beach opened the doors without announcement. He invited journalists, politicians, and prominent citizens to come see what had been built beneath them. The press couldn't process it. Headlines read, "A fashionable reception held in the bowels of the earth." The waiting room featured frescoed walls, framed paintings, a grand piano, a goldfish fountain, plush seating, and a combination of gas lamps and special zircon lights casting everything in soft white. The train car itself held 22 passengers in upholstered seats, as refined as any first-class carriage. The power came from a 48-ton blower fed by a 100-horsepower steam engine, pushing 100,000 cubic feet of air per minute through the tube. Passengers described the ride as gliding. No jolting, no fumes, just a smooth, quiet drift. 11,000 tickets were sold in the first 2 weeks, 400,000 rides in the first year. Scientific American declared it meant the end of street dust, that such discomforts would never exist underground. The public didn't just approve, they demanded expansion. They wanted it running the length of the island. But Beach couldn't legally charge fares without a proper franchise from the state. He needed Albany to authorize it, and that's where Tweed was still waiting. For 4 consecutive years, Beach lobbied the legislature. Bills passed both houses in 1871 and 1872. Both times, Governor John Hoffman vetoed them. Hoffman was Tweed's hand-picked protege. His stated concern was that the bills granted too much authority without adequate compensation to the city. The real concern was competition with the elevated railways Tweed had invested in. Meanwhile, wealthy property owners along Broadway, led by figures like John Jacob Astor and Alexander Stewart, filed lawsuits claiming tunneling would undermine their building foundations. Legal proceedings dragged on. A technology that functioned, a public that demanded it, an establishment dismantling every path forward. By late 1871, Tweed's empire was fracturing. The New York Times obtained internal ledgers documenting the scale of the theft. Political cartoons in Harper's Weekly turned public opinion. Tweed was arrested, tried, and ultimately convicted. He later escaped to Spain, was brought back, and died in prison. With Tweed gone, Beach finally had his opening. In 1873, the new governor signed Beach's expansion bill into law. Full authorization, 5 miles of pneumatic subway from Battery Park to Central Park. 4 years of obstruction, and Beach had finally won. Then, 3 weeks later, it was over. On September 18, 1873, J. Cook and Company, the country's primary financer of railroad construction, declared bankruptcy. The failure triggered the Panic of 1873, the worst economic collapse the nation had ever seen. 89 railroads went under. 18,000 businesses failed. Unemployment eventually reached 14%. Every investor who had committed to backing Beach's expansion dissolved overnight. Hold that sequence. A working system, finally authorized after years of deliberate obstruction, then destroyed by a financial crisis triggered by the very railroad industry that had blocked it. Beach had 6 months under his charter to secure funding. In the middle of the worst depression in American history, it was impossible. The pneumatic subway closed. The tunnel was sealed. Beach spent the rest of his life watching the city he had tried to rescue collapse under the same gridlock he had already solved.
The station entrance burned in a building fire in 1898. Whatever remained of the waiting room, the fountain, the piano, was presumably lost. The tunnel sat sealed beneath Broadway, unmarked. No plaque, no acknowledgement. Beach died in 1896. His New York Times obituary ran a few inches. Then, in February 1912, workers digging the new BMT Broadway subway line broke through a brick wall and found themselves standing inside Beach's tunnel. The air inside was dry and warm. The original train car sat on its tracks exactly where it had been left. The tunneling shield was still plugged in to the far end, ready to continue work that had been stopped 42 years before. They photographed it. Then they demolished everything to clear way for the new line. The tunneling shield was donated to Cornell University. Cornell has since lost track of it. One of the most consequential engineering artifacts in American transit history, misplaced. The company that had inherited Beach's rights sued the city for destroying their property. The outcome of that lawsuit is unrecorded. It simply disappears from the record. In 2013, Elon Musk introduced something called Hyperloop, pods moving through low-pressure tubes pushed by air, carrying passengers at high speed between cities. The media treated it as a vision of the future, a fifth mode of transportation, revolutionary. A tube, a car, a revolving fan. Little more is required. Beach wrote that in 1870, 400,000 people experienced it working. We're being offered the same idea repackaged as innovation 150 years later. The technology has never been the problem. The problem has always been who controls the approvals, who profits from the systems already in place, and who gets to decide what the future is allowed to look like. Beach built a working subway in 58 nights with his own money. New York waited 34 more years after his system already existed before it built one. And when it finally did, it acted as though the idea had just been conceived. In 1912, workers broke through a wall and found his train still waiting on the tracks. They documented it. Then they erased it. Somewhere beneath Broadway right now, the bones of America's first subway are built into the walls of tunnels used by millions of riders who have never heard the name Alfred Ely Beach. No memorial anyone can locate, no plaque anyone can confirm was ever installed, just the pattern. A technology that worked, a public that wanted it, a system that buried it, and a city that spent 3 decades choking on a problem one man had already solved, in secret, at night, with his own money right under their feet. The question isn't whether this happened. The question is how many times it's happened since. What else worked? What else was sealed behind brick and left to wait 42 years in the dark? What else are we still being promised as if it's new, that someone else already built and someone else decided we weren't allowed to have? The tunnel is gone. The pattern remains.